Hello, hello. Welcome to the latest episode of our Toronto Real Estate Podcast, where we dive deep into the ins and outs of selling your home in 2024. I'm your host, Ian Busher, and today we're tackling a big question. What is the best pricing strategy to sell your home in Toronto this year? Now, folks, this is a tough nut to crack. Let's face it. No magic formula works for every home in Toronto. We're looking at various factors here, from market dynamics to your property's condition, asset class, and the uniqueness of our neighborhoods, just to name a few. So what influences pricing and pricing strategy? We've got market conditions, inventory levels, seasons, neighborhood comparables, buyer trends, and let's not forget each property's strengths and weaknesses. There are 3 pricing strategies that are most commonly used, and today we're going to break them down for you. We'll explore each one, what to expect from them, and even what to do if things don't go as planned. Pros and cons, we'll cover it all. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my good friend, Kori Marin, and my good friend, Ralph Fox. How are you guys?
We're well.
Fantastic, Ian. It's minus 57 outside, and I keep getting paler and paler every time I look in the camera. But other than that, great.
It's true. Kori, how are you?
I'm good. Well, I'll be the optimist here and to say I don't even care how cold it is. There was sunshine out today for the first time in 2 months.
That's a good point.
True.
Excellent point.
And I am happy to soak that in. And I'm like, gosh, I feel so good today. And everyone looks so miserable in the cold. And I'm like bopping along like, there's sun, there's sun, there's sun. Like that.
True.
And they're
It's
like, oh my
huge.
God, this woman's so annoying. So I think it makes a huge difference. And Ian and I were talking before the podcast started rolling. And we're like, the days are just feeling just a little bit longer out there.
Oh, yeah.
So that always
longer.
is just a huge step in the right direction. Smidge.
Yeah.
Right?
A
It's not
smidge.
4:00 in blackout right now. So I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, I am so happy we are discussing this topic today. And I think there's just a lot of intricacies about pricing and pricing strategy that some of our viewership might not even really know about or understand. And the reason that we thought this topic might be valuable is we're actually talking with a lot of seller clients over the past week who are prepping listings for the spring. And we are talking about these various strategies about how to list your property in Toronto. What price do you go out at, and what strategy do you use to get the highest and best price? We're going to cover 3 strategies today. So one is very common in Toronto, which is list low and have an offer date. And we're going to get into all the details about what that means. Number 2 is list at market value or slightly higher than what the property is probably worth on paper and negotiate with parties one-on-one. And then the third option we're going to talk about is listing moderately. So a moderate list price with a 24 to 48 hour irrevocable, which is a long time window for buyers to submit offers and then possibly elicit multiple offers. And we're going to get into all the details of that too. So those are the 3 main strategies that we want to cover today. We want to talk about the pros of them. We want to talk about the cons of those. And then we want to talk about what assets fit into each mold the best. And of course, there is no perfect strategy, and every property deserves its own custom strategy and pricing look every time you list a property any time of year in this city that just seems to change week over week. You guys on board?
Absolutely.
All right.
Ian's on board, and you're on board. I'm on board. So let's do it.
All right. So the first strategy, so number 1 that I want to talk about is listing low and holding an offer date at a specific date and time. Ralph, do you want to just give the viewers a little bit more context as to exactly what that strategy means?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that in Toronto real estate speak, your list price oftentimes is just a marketing number and has absolutely no reflection upon the value range of the property or potentially what it even might sell for at a future point in time. So when this specific strategy is used by a seller and their agent, the intent is to price the property below or sometimes well below market value in the hopes of getting a lot of attention and a lot of people and a lot of activity to see the property, and then have a day where you accept offers, where you have a night where you have offers, or a day where you accept your offers, in the hopes of getting multiple offers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 offers. And the idea being is that when you have more offers and more energy and more excitement and more fear of missing out on potentially acquiring a list property from buyers, that will push the price up, the eventual sale price up, even higher than market value, and sometimes in the hopes of the seller, beyond their greatest expectations. Does it happen every time? No, but it can be a very effective tool for certain asset classes or during specific times in the market.
Excellent explanation. I'm just going to add a little bit more color to that just for the newbies out there that's never heard of this before. So when you go on your House Sigma app or your realtor.ca app and you see a house listed for $999,999 and you're like, "Oh my gosh, this house looks amazing. It's listed for under $1 million. It has 4 bedrooms and it's renovated with a basement apartment and a pool in the back. Oh my gosh, I found the secret listing that nobody else has seen." Well, there's a caveat here because likely that property has listed at the top of the week. Let's say Monday or Tuesday is generally when the new inventory comes out, like the great inventory comes out at the top of the week, Monday or Tuesday. And the listing agent will market that property at $999,999 for a full week. That includes the agent open house possibly, and then the open houses on Saturday and Sunday, and then all the private showings with buyer agents and their clients. So during that 1 week period, that property might have 30 showings, 50 showings, and we've had properties in hot markets that have had 150 showings over that 7-day period. So by the time that offer date comes, and that offer date is a very specific date and time, and there's lots of protocols involved on offers. And we have other podcasts specifically about this, which I can link in the show notes below. The idea is after 150 people have seen it in various different ways, they all compete for it at that given date and time. And as Ralph mentioned, hoping that once they start competing against one another, for that property, the property will sell at its highest and best number, and hopefully for a number that blows the seller's mind. So this is a very strategic thing that the listing agent and the sellers do, knowing very well that the property is not worth below $1 million. In fact, the property could be worth 1.3, 1.4, or even 1.5 million. And they're doing this just to draw attention and attract buyers to see the property. Ian, do you want to add anything, just a context about the actual strategy itself, and then we'll get into the pros and cons and who this strategy is for?
I was just going to say that the one thing that the two of you didn't say for total newbies is many people liken it to an auction. It sort of has a bit of a feel to it like a silent auction where you're not sure what the other people are doing. You don't have a paddle, but you're submitting, what you'd be willing to pay, and working with your buyer agent to try to figure out what really is the value here. What is the market value? But then what is ultimately the price that I'd be willing to pay for it, and how high, and that's what makes this dramatic and passionate and emotional is that sort of unknown quality to it.
Yeah, 100%. Really good point. So what are the pros of this strategy? So we've mentioned a couple of them hidden in our former context, but it definitely creates a competitive environment. All right. And this is so true. Like, it's the feeling like if somebody else wants something, then you want it too. It's just like fighting over a boy in high school. Just because like one the popular girl's dating him, then all the other girls want to date him too. So they start competing for that one guy, that one whoever it might be.
Kind of reminds me of that episode of Seinfeld where George made up a fictitious girlfriend and was showing everyone this picture of this very attractive girl as his girlfriend. And all of a sudden he started getting all these dates because people thought, well, if a girl like that would go out with him, then I want to go out with him. Same thing. Seinfeld's episode was based on that exact theory.
They were Seinfeld was basing it all on the Toronto real estate market, for sure.
Pretty much.
Okay, so it creates more competition. All right, so that definitely increases the potential sale price for the property. And then as Ian mentioned, you're driving valuation through this blind auction concept. And we will talk about TRESA at the end of this section because I want to address that as well because that's really important and that's a big, big change I want our viewers to understand. But because you're competing with people, you don't know what everybody else is doing. I mean, I have seen spreads of offers. This is like the inside scoop here. So let's just say we had like 13 offers on a property. We represented the seller. We had all the offers in front of us and we're looking at each one individually with our selling clients. we've had spreads between the lowest offer and the highest offer of $300,000 or more sometimes. We've had spreads of $200,000 between the top offer and the second highest offer. Like huge differences between offers. So because people don't know what they're competing against, it's driving valuation up. And the other benefit of this is that the seller knows that there's no money has been left on the table. They feel good that they've extracted the highest and best potential price for the property, especially when they get those record-breaking numbers. Any other pros of this strategy?
I think you covered the top ones, and that is to create the competition and to have an environment where you know that you're not leaving any money on the table, provided that you have marketed the property to its highest and best and had the best possible exposure during that week while you're on the market.
Yeah. Let's talk about the cons of this strategy.
Yes.
Because there are. You guys want to jump in with some cons?
There is the possibility that for all of the effort of the listing agent and the seller and the painting, the renovations, the staging, all of those things, it just is not a property that is drumming up a lot of interest out of the public. So that's one con.
Yes. Like when offer date rolls around and nobody offers on the property.
Yeah. And it's
the worst feeling. Because you've done everything that you can to try to ensure that that won't happen, and just shit happens sometimes. And it could be a winter storm. It could be like 5 other listings that came out that week. It could be something that happened in the news and there's like crazy media out there, or I don't know, like the inspection, the basement was throwing people off and they didn't like the low ceiling heights and you didn't expect that reaction. Whatever it is, and we've all been there before when we are acting for a seller, offer date rolls around and nothing happens. Not one offer comes in. So Ralph, when that happens, what do we do?
Well, just to touch on that for a second, it is such a interesting process because, as you were saying earlier, we could have 13 offers and there could be one standout $200,000 above the highest second offer. So if something happens where that one potential buyer out there in the universe decides to go to a Leaf game, or has to go to the hospital, or has to do something for their mother-in-law, or whatever it is, that one person doesn't show up, that could be the difference. And so it's not a foolproof strategy. Not all agents understand comparables. Not all agents understand how to offer a fair market value offer for a property when the list price is far below it. And oftentimes, buyers don't necessarily understand the same thing if they're not given proper guidance from their agents. So it can be a very confusing process as a buyer. And as a seller, you're really just looking for that one needle in the haystack. And there could be a whole bunch of reasons why they never show up. And sometimes people just aren't interested in offering on a property that's holding off on offers.
True.
And that's a whole other thing because they just don't want to compete.
Yes.
Which you almost always have to do for a really good property in Toronto, even in a down market. What happens is let's just say, and this is another thing to really explain to a seller when they're considering moving forward with this type of strategy, is they're under absolutely no obligation to accept an offer. And just because they put a price at a certain number, it does not mean they're obligated if somebody meets that to accept that. And I think when you tell sellers that, they sort of start to relax a little bit when they hear that they do have that option. And then what the plan B is, which essentially means that if you don't sell the property for a whole host of reasons on that offer day or offer night, the typical strategy is to terminate the listing the next day and then come back out at a higher price. Now, this can be very confusing for the public and also for a lot of buyers out there because they'll see a property that was listed at $999, it gets terminated, and the next day it's on the market for $1.4 million. Well, what does that mean? Like, what are they doing?
You
So
didn't sell, so you raised the price? What?
Yes.
Yeah.
right. So typically what happens is if strategy one doesn't work, then you move to the next strategy, which is probably to price it slightly over market value and then accept offers anytime. And I cannot tell you how many times where we have tried strategy one to gain multiple offers. We are unable to. We terminate, we relist at a higher price, and then all of a sudden you can end up in multiple offers again, 2 days later, a week later, a month later. So it still can happen at any point in time, but it's really important if you're a seller and you're going to move forward with this type of strategy to know that you're under no obligation to accept any offers and that there is a fallback plan, which is very common. And any agent who's tenured in Toronto real estate will understand, and a lot of buyers will understand, but might be confusing to a lot of newbies out there seeing that type of price change or price action from low to high, seemingly very counterintuitive.
Yes.
And the other thing about this process, which can be a perceived con, is a lot of sellers have a heart attack when they're thinking, oh my God, my place is worth 1.7 and you want me to list it at 1.495. That's really low. That feels really, really low. And the point of this being is, going back to what I was saying earlier, is the list price oftentimes can just be a marketing number. And it could be $1, because really what you're signaling is we will have a blind auction on a specific date, come with your best and highest. And one of the other things I think that's really important to understand, just to make it even more confusing, is there is a section on an MLS listing that says broker remarks. So as a listing agent, on behalf of the seller, you can, in the broker's remarks, say, we are holding off on offers till next Tuesday at 12 a.m. All offers to be registered. It can be very confusing because you're seeing that $9.99 listing and you're not seeing any notes when you're looking on realtor.ca. And when you're looking at House Sigma, you can't see that they're holding off. You just see the $9.99 price and you're like, that seems too low. I guess maybe they're holding off on offers. That's too good to be true. And generally in Toronto real estate, if it looks too good to be true, it is.
It probably is. Yeah.
But it's very frustrating, even as an agent, because you'd really want that to be disclosed on MLS or realtor.ca or House Sigma so that everybody understands what is actually happening here. It would take so much confusion out of the process and make it very understandable. And that's why it's really important to have these type of discussions with sellers and buyers early on in the process. And I think it's great that we're having this discussion on YouTube so that a lot of our clients out there, or potential clients, or just people who want to learn more about Toronto real estate, can get a better sense of how the market actually works.
So true. And even as an active buyer that's gone through the process many times, it's still hard for a lot of buyers to wrap their heads around this, even if they are experienced. And it might take them like 2 offers, 3 offers, or 4 offers to start being like, oh, I get it. The list price doesn't have anything to do with value. And I have to come in with my own personal highest and best to actually win this property. And it's like a psychological shift that happens one day with buyers where they just clicks and they're like, oh my gosh, I understand now. Okay, this is super helpful. So this strategy is very specific. It's not also for the disposition for all sellers that are like risk adverse. People who don't like to be risky or feel like they're playing games or could not actually even handle waiting through like an entire week to accept offers. It's just not palatable for some people. Like some sellers' dispositions are not built for listing low and having an offer date. We might recommend it for certain reasons, but if that's like not your jam, then there's another strategy that we could work through. But I want to talk about the property types right now in 2024 where this offer strategy would be something that we would really want you to explore as a seller. So I have a few ideas. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. So I definitely think that we still have low inventory on quality, low rise properties under 2 million.
Sure.
So I think if you have a great low rise, so that's just a house, everyone, or freehold is another way it's described, and you live in a great neighborhood and you have something to offer, a value proposition, And the value proposition could be many different things. You have a house that needs to be renovated, or perhaps you have a beautifully renovated 4-bedroom property, or perhaps you're in a great neighborhood, or you have a great extension. There's many versions of a value proposition, but you have something that people want in a great neighborhood in central or downtown Toronto. This is a strategy we would definitely encourage you to explore, especially if your property is worth under $2 million. I also think really unique hard lofts or hard loft conversions in townhomes. This could be a great strategy for as well. And sometimes it's really good when you're working with a property that does not have amazing comparables. Like it's a one of a kind showstopper. And you're like, you don't really want to put a ceiling on the price because you're like, it might be even worth even more than it's worth on paper, depending on the buyer's disposition at any given date and time when they're offering on the property. And so sometimes you want the market to dictate the value of the home with an offer date, especially on those one of a kind properties. You're like, I know this could sell for 1.5 million, but it also could sell for like 1.8 million, depending on what it's worth to the buyer because it's that special. So I think that's another asset class that would do really well in 2024 with this specific offer strategy. And then I think also highly desirable condos as well. I think there's a lot of them, a corner unit. It's got a great terrace. It's got split bedrooms. It's got en suites on both, a nice open concept, really nice kitchen, low maintenance fees. I mean, it's definitely worth exploring. As we wrap up offer strategy number 1, I just want to touch base on the new TRESA rules, which are certainly going to change the game. Ralph, what does TRESA mean again?
Great question. It means Trust in Real Estate Services Act.
Good answer. It's like you
know.
just did your homework.
Or something like that.
And I love that. And this is about the transparent offer process. So the first thing that our viewers should know is now that this has been introduced, this transparent offer process, and we're going to explain that in more detail. I just want buyers to know that when we say transparent offer process, that still means that your personal identification information still remains exceptionally confidential. So that's the number one thing. So I'm going to take a step back. To date, up until December 1st, when there has been an offer date at a specific date and time, all of the offers come in, and the only thing that's disclosed about those offers is how many offers were registered for that given property. No other information is disclosed, not the offer price, not the deposit amounts, if there's conditions. All of that information is kept private from all of the other offers bidding on this particular address. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably the first time I've actually articulated it in this type of format. So now sellers have full discretion, and sellers can choose between open or closed offer processes. And they have the option to switch from one process to another during the offer period, meaning the seller can decide if they want to disclose the offer prices, the terms, the conditions, the deposits, and the closing dates to the other offers. Am I correct in the way I described that?
Yeah, I would say partial disclosure. So it's not full disclosure. It's not the sellers don't have the choice of disclosure or non-disclosure. They have the choice of disclosure, non-disclosure, or partial disclosure, meaning that they can give out information that they choose to. So partway through the process, they could say, I know we chose not to disclose, but now we have 5 offers. We're going to let them all know the prices of all the offers, or they could make deposits, or they could open it all up. It's up to them, and they can change their mind throughout the process at any point in time.
So what is the benefit of this new change, and why is this happening?
Well, I think it's important because there's been a lot of talk in the media basically stipulating that the reason why Toronto real estate prices are expensive is because of the process with which offers are submitted and properties are sold in Toronto, meaning blind bidding. So they're specifically blaming blind bidding as the cause of real estate prices to be as high as they are today. Secondarily to that, they are claiming that there are sometimes unethical practices happening in these blind bidding scenarios that may end up not protecting a consumer or buyer's best interest. And so in response to those two concerns, this act has been an attempt, and in my opinion, a very much flawed and failed attempt or initiative to deal with these concerns. And the reason why I say this is as follows. Number one, the seller can change their mind at any point in time, and there is no formal way of communicating anything. So it's not like it could be via text, it could be verbal, it could be via email, it could be partial information. So there is no standardized way that this information is passed on. And so it leaves for all sorts of gray area because the rules of the game are now changing on the fly at the sole discretion of the seller, which gives the seller theoretically a tremendous amount of power. However, buyers now have the option when they submit their offers to put in a condition that says is if their information is disclosed, their offer immediately becomes null and void. So what's interesting about this is you would think that most of the offers that would be coming in would have that clause, because why would somebody want their information leveraged against themselves to their detriment to potentially drive the price of a property up even higher? So a lot of this could be moot because we expect to be seeing a lot of those clauses in future offers.
I think this is going to be really messy.
I
I
agree.
just find it really bizarre. And the fact that there is no formal process to share information gives me the niggle. It makes me nervous. And as selling agents, we're going to have to be very, very clear as to how we handle this and document everything very specifically. And the flip-flopping between one strategy and the other, like I want to share and now I don't want to share, I find that also to be exceptionally confusing. And then the buyer also has the opportunity to not share. I just think
how all this information gets shared.
That's what I'm saying.
There's nothing standardized about this, and it gives, in a market typically in Toronto where everything is already very favored to the seller because we're so constrained with inventory, it's giving them even more leverage and more power and more control, not less.
Yeah.
And it's making accountability and it's making transparency even more clouded and more gray than it was prior to this act coming into place.
I think what I'd want to do as the listing agent and the seller agent wants the buyers to disclose this information is I'd have a Google sheet. And then I would have, offer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because obviously we're not sharing anybody's names. And then whatever the seller wants the buyers to disclose would go into that spreadsheet, whether it's like price or deposit or conditions. And then I would share that sheet with the buyer agents and they would all be invited to that sheet. Oh, but then you'd be disclosing all the buyer agents' names.
I thought the same thing about the Google Sheet, or someone else even suggested like you create a unique website where you post it. I think the problem is it would be difficult to, you're telling everyone go there to get the information, but you're not broadcasting it. So they might say, oh, I didn't know about the website. I didn't realize that all this, and that's where all of the chaos is going to come from. I think there might be an opportunity here for Broker Bay to develop something and step in to help track this and who's getting what. But you're right.
What if you typed in the wrong number? It's like 11:30 at night.
Yeah.
You've got 20 offers.
Yeah, I agree with you. But
it leaves so much room for error.
That's the problem.
It really would.
Yeah.
And it would be me typing it. I'd be like, oh my gosh.
I wonder if, the vast majority of agents kind of feel this way, and if it'll be an option that we can use that ultimately almost no one ever does. And when you see it, it'll be that much more confusing because we don't have any experience with it.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that buyer clause will just become a standard clause.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you just put that in your Schedule A.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your Schedule B.
Yeah, Schedule B.
Your Schedule B. Technically, your Schedule B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's move on to strategy number 2. I think this one will be a little bit tighter as well because these next two are a little bit more simplistic and they're not as confusing for the buyer pool out there. So strategy number 2 is list at market value or slightly higher than what the property is worth on paper and negotiate with parties one-on-one. Like we're going old school and we're negotiating with their agent and their buyer and we're going back and forth, and we're negotiating everything from price to condition to terms to closing to deposit amounts and all the stuff in between.
The way your parents likely did it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly how our parents did it, except they did not have DocuSign and they were doing this all on paper with those like carbon copies underneath, super old school. So let's talk about the pros of this strategy. So I'll jump in here. So definite pro is there are no games being played. You're playing all of your cards off the top and you're being like, hey, buyers, I have this property. It's marketed really well. It's super beautiful. I've got a home inspection, showings anytime, lots of value, beautifully staged, photographed to the max degree. And I'm telling you that I want $1.5 million for my home. Come and get it. That's basically what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes the process simple. The buyers aren't confused. And the buyer can then say, well, you want 1.5, but I feel like it's worth 1.4. And then we can start negotiating back and forth based on what the buyer feels the value is and then what the seller feels the value is. So no games. Kind of love that. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other pros of this strategy?
It's more of an old school strategy, and it's the way real estate had been transacted in Toronto probably up until the early 2000s. It's the way most real estate functions. It's the way most people over a certain age understand real estate to work. And it's logical, it's clean, it's concise. It's people sitting around at a table and saying, okay, here's what we feel it's worth based on what you think it's worth. And then you negotiate mostly down from that standpoint. So typically you're listing a little higher than you think that it's worth, leaving room to negotiate downwards. Sometimes even when you employ this type of strategy, you can still end up in multiple offers or a bidding war, although it's not necessarily the stated intent when going to market because you're pricing it within the range or maybe slightly above the range that you're looking to achieve. So I think it's a much more straightforward way of selling a property that a lot of people can understand very clearly and sellers can feel comfortable with as well, because some are very risk averse and just don't feel comfortable with listing something significantly below the value that they perceive or ultimately want to sell the property for.
Yes. And there's a lot of buyers that don't want to participate in multiple offers.
Yep.
They don't want to get caught up in that emotional roller coaster, and they strictly just want to operate in this type of fashion. So it makes sense for a lot of scenarios, and I think it works in specific types of properties really well. Like we just said, those that are risk adverse, really good for sellers. I think this is really good for super luxury properties. I think this is a must do. I don't think you're going to get multiple offers like on a $9 million property necessarily. It could happen. I'm just saying it's not necessarily going to happen. No. It's not a shoo-in. I think super generic things, I think this could work really well for. I think it's really great for tenanted properties, 1,000,000%. When we're in slower market conditions, that we use this technique to sell properties in the back half of last year more than we had in a long period of time. And yes, things took longer to sell, but we were negotiating with people back and forth. And this is and it was actually kind of fun because we don't always get to do that. So that worked really well. And I think it's good for unique properties that might not have a lot of demand. There are some cons. So I think a big con of this strategy is if you list too high and you screw up your initial pricing. And if you do that and the market always dictates the value of your property and you're not getting showings, and then you're certainly not getting offers if you're not getting showings, then you're really only stuck with one option, and that is price decreases or relisting and being on the market for longer. And then over time, it starts to stigmatize the property if you've just gone out way overshot off the top. So you need to be really sensitive to what the property is worth on paper, just a little bit higher to avoid stigmatizing the property. I think that's the number one con. And then the other one is if it sells too quickly. So this is just the sort of opposite end. So let's just use an example. The property is worth 111, let's just say, and you list it for 1125. And on the first day on the market, you get an offer for 11, like within the first 5 hours of being on the market. What do you think the seller's going to think?
Oh, we could have gotten more.
Yeah. We didn't list
We
high
listed
enough.
too low.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that certainly can happen.
But there's also an old adage in real estate that often the first offer is the best offer. And sometimes, especially if you have a different or more unique or interesting type of property, somebody could be looking or have been looking for 6 months for something like what you have, or maybe just recently lost out on another opportunity and seen that your property is priced within the same range. And they're like, I don't want to learn the same lesson all over again and lose out on this opportunity. So as long as you understand the fundamentals as a seller and as a listing agent and are in communication with each other, understanding the value of the property, and you do all of the right things from beginning to end, it's quite often that you can get a good offer right off the bat. And it's not the sort of thing that you would want to find yourself becoming very greedy in, because we have seen those situations where somebody refuses that first offer, all of a sudden thinking their house suddenly is worth far more than it's worth. They lose that buyer, and then they end up sitting on the market or having to do price reductions down and down. And we've seen this happen a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching this, don't let that be you.
I like the warning. All right. Strategy number 3. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Drum roll, please.
Be prepared, because there is a strategy 3, and
Yes,
we do
there is.
use this one a lot as well. This means you list the property at a moderate price and request a 24 to 48 hour irrevocable on all offers. For those that might not have heard the term before, Toronto real estate moves so quickly that oftentimes, if we're representing a buyer and we're submitting an offer on a property, we will give the seller 4 hours to respond to an offer.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say, for example, I submit the offer at 12 p.m., Ralph, which is noon.
Yes.
The irrevocable
Noted.
might say 4 p.m. that day.
Yeah.
And so the seller has only 4 hours to respond to that offer, which is a short irrevocable. There have been times we've given even shorter irrevocables, like 1 hour or 2 hours for the seller to respond.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So viewers, you need to wrap your head around this. It's important that you do, because this time window that's available, that 4-hour window that I gave to the seller with my offer, is a time window that the selling agent has to try and elicit more offers to come to the table. She's like, this girl, Kori, registered an offer at noon. I've got 4 hours to try and hunt out or gather more offers to compete against Kori's offer. And so 4 hours is enough time for somebody else to possibly come and play ball. So I'm going to now step back and talk about this concept with offer strategy number 3. So remember, list the property moderately. So like you're not being aggressive, and you're requesting buyer agents to give you a 24 to 48 hour irrevocable, a long period for the seller to respond to all offers. And what we're trying to do in this situation is create a window of time to elicit multiple offers. If the buyer agent follows your request or your direction and gives you that amount of time on their offer expiration time, that gives me, the selling agent, like the easiest window to start calling and schmoozing with agents and trying to encourage them to come to the party and compete. So in a way, it's kind of reverse engineering a multiple offer scenario and trying to make it work that way if you can. Make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
The one challenge here is that buyer agents do not need to adhere to your irrevocable request. They act on the best interest of the buyer, And they can be like, it's not in my buyer's best interest to give the seller all this time to go window shopping for other offers. I'm only going to give you 4 hours. Take it or leave it. And so sometimes this like hope that you're going to try to drive multiple offers backfires, and you end up with just the one offer that you may or may not want to work with. Is this all making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So who is strategy number 3 for? It's definitely for the risk adverse. It's good for slower market conditions, and it's good for where there's questionable valuation. So it's kind of like a half in, half out. It's like a blend of strategy number
hybrid.
1
Yeah.
and a blend of strategy number 2, and you're bringing them together and hoping we can have a dance party that way.
I think the key word is request. And when you make that request, anything can happen. And so it's kind of a strategy, but it really is based on the interpretation of the buyer agent. And typically out of town buyer agents will adhere to this request because they're polite. And that's the way things are done outside the 416. But inside the 416, it's a much more Game of Thrones type of environment. And that's where you see agents, buyer agents coming in with those super tight irrevocables. So, yes, you are right. It's a more balanced strategy, but at the same point in time, it will only be as effective as based on the adherence of the people offering on the property. I think it is interesting, especially if you have your more generic condos where somebody might be looking for the location, or somebody, might see some opportunity in the property, but it's not that unique 1 in 1,000 type of condo, but it is something that somebody might be willing to give you the time to acquire.
And it really is valuable in situations where you have multiple decision makers. So, for example, an estate sale is a really good example of this. And there's like 3 brothers, a sister, and an aunt, and they all have like a stake in as to what the outcome looks like, and they might not all agree on strategy. This is a really good way to deal with that. And also, the buyer agent will totally respect you if you're like, hey, I've got 5 people I need to talk to about this offer. Please don't give me 4 hours. I actually really, truly need the 48 hours so that they can speak to their lawyer, the family can get together, they can discuss how they want to respond to this. So that's a really good scenario for this strategy. It does really work with international clients, and it has to because they're in a different time zone and they just really will not be able to deal with an offer coming in Eastern Standard Time. And I also think it's beneficial for sellers that are concerned about capping value. So it kind of just gives them like a little bit of hope that they might be able to sell it for more. Like it just gives them that little like, okay, like I feel good about the pricing, but there just still might be just a small chance for more than one offer because they kind of want that to happen, but they're too afraid to have an offer date. So they're like kind of testing the waters.
Yeah, I think your example is a great one about an estate sale. And generally, as an agent, you can see who the seller is. So it'll say the estate of so-and-so and so-and-so. And you're like, okay, that's an estate sale. There's probably lawyers involved. That makes sense. As a buyer agent, when you get the excuse that, they're traveling or they're in another time zone or whatever, it's like, okay, what time zone are they in? I'll do the math and I'll submit my offer according to their time zone. It's in this day and age of technology, like maybe 20 years ago, very valid excuse. But today, when everybody's walking around with a handheld, I don't buy it. And you're better off just saying, well, that's just what we want or are asking for, than actually give some ridiculous excuse because they didn't have to go away the day their property went on the market either. So, I think the excuses don't make sense. You either say it's a strategy or give a really valid reason that you could back up why you're doing it, and then see what happens, because you will get those agents sometimes who will give you those 24, 48 hour.
They totally will.
God bless them.
No, they totally, totally will. The last point I want to add to strategy number 3 is any seller that's going to use this tool or this strategy, they just need to be ready for disappointment. Like it doesn't always become a multiple offer scenario. It's like kind of a soft way of doing it. So you just have to be prepared to kind of be disappointed if it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Even with all that time, you still may not see somebody else coming forward.
Exactly. Just because we have the time doesn't mean that anyone else is going to come forward. And this is the value of the selling agent's job, to be going through all three of these pricing strategies with you sellers out there that are selling in 2024. And you want to understand your options and look at all of these pros and cons. And then I highly recommend that you don't even decide on your strategy until much, much closer till your listing date. And what you're going to do, selling people out there, is you're going to pay attention to what's working and not working in your neighborhood and your street. And you're going to be like, oh, these sales happen in January, February, March. I kind of wanted to list in April. Looks like these 5 people got really good prices. What did they do? And then you go and you look and they're like, oh, they all had offer dates. Or, ooh, 2 of them had offer dates and 3 of them had offers anytime. Ooh. And you're going to be like, how long were they on the market for? All of those types of things. You're going to flush that out and you're going to make your decision a week before you go to market, and maybe even the day before you go to market.
For sure. And if you look at areas like Leslieville, where you go, ooh, Leslieville, 20% usually is what you see between the difference of list price and actual sale price. So it's almost like its own separate language in that area. It's a tell. Oh, we want 1.2. Let's list it at 1. It really speaks to that area. One of the other things that you can do as a listing agent or as a seller is, if you look at a certain pocket and you see 4 properties that have sold in the last month, you see one of them has this very big standout price, and it did something different in terms of its strategy than the other 3. That may give you an indication as to a specific strategy that worked in this market, in this area, in a specific set of time. So areas speak to sellers and buyers in a certain way, and areas and pockets can shift. And so you look for examples of what's worked and what hasn't worked as a way to help try to figure out what is the best strategy to achieve the highest possible price when we go to market.
You've got to pay attention to market timing. And you've really got to be flexible to pivot all the way up to your listing date, all the way up to the listing date. And sometimes, we've talked about this on other podcasts, 1 hour before we go to market, I do one more sweep of MLS to make sure that nobody else has come out on market on your street, your neighbor hasn't listed, somebody on your floor of your condo hasn't listed, whatever it is. I just want one last checks and balance just to make sure our strategy is on point and we are ready to go crush it out there, Toronto. All right. Anything else, boys, that we want to add for our viewers out there about these 3 strategies today?
No, I think we did a really good job of covering it and then adding in the new changes with TRESA, because we will see that playing into the game theory of offer nights. So super interesting conversation for sure. But I think we did a great job. And these are the type of things that we talk about with our sellers every single day. And if you are a seller thinking about being a seller or know somebody who is going to be a seller and are counseling them, I think it's really important to understand that you do have options. There's pros and cons to either of them. And sometimes you need a combination of one or both or several of them in order to get to that finish line.
Yes. And I will link some of our other former podcasts in the show notes because we have a really, really good one on how to win on offer date. And I think that will be really valuable, especially for our newbies out there who have never gone out there and competed for property in Toronto. I think that one in specific will be a really, really good resource for you.
Awesome.
And there you have it, Toronto. We've just unpacked the top 3 pricing strategies for selling your home in 2024. Whether you're leaning towards a competitive pricing approach, aiming for record-smashing sale price, or somewhere in between, remember, the right strategy depends on many factors unique to your property, situation, and personal disposition. Before we sign off, don't forget to check out our website for more resources, detailed articles, and personalized advice. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to our video podcast, leave a comment, or share it with your friends and family who might be kickstarting their own real estate journeys. Stay tuned for our next episode next Friday, where we'll unpack more topics related to Toronto's crazy housing market. Kori, well, what do we like people to know about us?
I like them to know that they can contact us anytime because we are super nice and knowledgeable around these parts.
Wonderful. And Ralph, what would you like people to do before they sign off?
Please hit that like button if you like any of our content, or please be sure to hit that subscribe button, because we would absolutely love to stay in touch with you on our video journey.
I love it. Thank you so much,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Bye.